Hi, everyone. Welcome back on this Christmas Eve. We had a little technical difficulties earlier, and I wanted to come on because I planned to preach a sermon, and I want to preach a Christmas Eve sermon. So here we go. We will see. We'll see how this goes. Sorry for those technical difficulties earlier. We are here on this Christmas Eve. Merry Christmas to you. I wanted to come on and give you a little bit of a reflection on this Christmas Eve, because in the traditional Christmas Eve readings, we hear of people. The Bible, the New Testament, names names on this Christmas Eve. And these are names that we might tend to gloss over because we aren't living 2,000 years ago. So 2,000 years later, these names might not mean as much to us today as they meant to people 2,000 years ago, as they meant to Matthew and Luke, who are writing the nativity, the birth story of Jesus. So why are they dropping these names? Hi, Kat. Hi, Holly. Merry Christmas to you. Matthew and Luke drop these names. They are powerful political figures that they drop of the ancient world. Matthew focuses on a man named King Herod. You remember the story about the wise men. Actually, they're magi. They are astrologers. And one of the things that I love about the Christmas story is there is this tendency within Christianity to demonize astrology, to demonize magic. Friends, these are magi. They're magicians. Where does God go? How does God show up in the world? To people that we might not expect, to people that many Christians might actually demonize. I have dear friends who consider themselves, no, I have dear friends who are witches, who are magi, who are astrologers. And guess what? They're included in this story. The Magi are here to show us that whenever we put up barriers and boundaries of God's love and God's interaction with others, that God breaks down those boundaries. That is what God is like. Can I get an amen in the chat section? Hi again, Melanie. Merry Christmas, Melissa. So this is already a deconstruction of much of religion. It's an expansion. It's a God is here for all people story. And here in the Gospel of Matthew, as I mentioned, it focuses on King Herod. King Herod was the king of the Jews during this time. And King Herod kept his power in a way that many tyrants, many fascists do. How is that? Through violence or through the threat of violence. King Herod killed off his own children because he believed that in order to keep power, he had to use violence in order to make his life safe. King Herod was known for going out into the streets, for dressing up like a common person. He would disguise himself and go out into the streets of Jerusalem and listen for anybody who might be talking trash about him. And he would go back to his palace and have his police officers find those folks who were talking trash about him, and he would have them killed. This is how Herod kept power for himself. He wanted to kill off his enemies. And so when we hear Matthew talk about King Herod, oftentimes we're just like, oh, it's just like some king. No, what Matthew is doing here is making a political statement. He is saying that the world is not made better by the way of King Herod. He's saying that the world is not made better through acts of violence against others. The world is made better as we proclaim on this holy night by a baby boy who is born in a stable. Not a powerful king who lives in a palace, but a vulnerable baby boy who is born in a stable to a vulnerable mother and a vulnerable father out in a little town called Bethlehem, away from the power structures of Jerusalem, away from all of the violence of King Herod. Matthew drops King Herod's name down in the story of Jesus's birth in order to tell us something about how God's realm really works. Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, is saying you have a choice. Either the way of King Herod or the way of Jesus. That is the Christmas decision before us. In a similar way, the Gospel of Luke talks about the political leaders of his day. Emperor Augustus. Luke chapter 2 begins by talking about Emperor Augustus and the governor Quirinius. And why does that matter? Because Emperor Augustus conquered what was the known world back then to the people of this land. Emperor Augustus conquered the land from Great Britain all the way to India, the largest empire of that time. And how did he do it? Through the sword. Like King Herod kept power through his sword, Emperor Augustus gained more and more power through the sword. Emperor Augustus, as he went on his travels to conquer more land, would go to his army would go to new lands, and they would say, "Who is Lord?" And the people in the land had to say, "Caesar is Lord," or they would be killed. This is so crucial to understand because the way that Herod gained power was through violence. The ancient Roman Empire had propaganda, and one of those slogans, the propaganda slogans, was peace through strength. You know what that meant? Peace through military strength. We are going to create peace by killing our enemies. King Herod and Emperor Augustus had a similar framework that they were going by, and it's a framework that almost every political leader goes by. The way to peace is to kill our enemies. Emperor Augustus would go into these lands and demand that people call him Lord. And what would happen if they didn't? They would be crucified or they would be killed by the sword. Those were the options. And so here's why Christmas matters. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus drops down the name, or Luke drops the name Emperor Augustus and says, that's not it. That's not it. Emperor Augustus wanted people to worship him as the Son of God. So when the New Testament calls Jesus the Son of God, when the New Testament talks about the virgin birth as Jesus being the Son of God, it is not about purity. And it's not about Mary having this eternal purity. That's missing the point. What is the point of Jesus being called the Son of God? It is a political statement. It is a way of Mary and Jesus participating in the realm of God that says that the way of Caesar, the way of violence, the way of gaining peace through violence is not God's way. It is not the way of the Son of God, the true Son of God. The way of the true Son of God comes to us through a young, vulnerable girl who says yes to God's non-violent love in the world. Mary says yes to birthing God's non-violent, all-embracing love in the world. Mary says yes. In her Magnificat, she says that the powerful are going to be brought low, and the low are going to be brought up. This is Mary's declaration that something new is happening in the world, that Caesar Augustus and King Herod don't have the last word, that a baby boy is going to have the last word, that this baby boy who is born of this vulnerable young woman and Joseph, he is going to have the last word, not King Herod, not Emperor Augustus. Jesus is going to have the last word. And what is that last word? It's the word of love. It's the word of compassion. It is this invitation to follow Jesus into God's realm. And in order to do that, we have to resist the realm, the way of Caesar and the way of King Herod. And on this Christmas, here's where I'm going to get a little prophetic maybe. On this Christmas Eve, we have to bring this into our world today, because I'm afraid that many Christians actually choose the way of Caesar Augustus and the way of King Herod as opposed to the way of Jesus the Christ. Can I get an amen in the chat section? Here is why. This last 2 weeks here in the United States, we have had political decisions to make. And one of those decisions was to increase our military budget once again. How did Caesar Augustus expand his empire? By expanding his military. By taxing the people and making sure that those taxes went to his military so that he could expand his empire and bring peace through military might. Does that sound familiar to any of you? I think it should. That is the way of Caesar Augustus. It is not the way of Christ. It is the way of the United States. It is not the way of Christ. Every year, it seems, we have this come about. Are we going to increase the United States military budget? Yes, we are. We're going to do it over and over and over again. And nobody is going to say, but can we afford this? Nobody is seriously going to say, wow, that's a lot of money we're giving to the military. Maybe we've given the military enough money and we should give more money to something different. Maybe we should give more money to Build Back Better. Here you go. You ready for this? Build Back Better will do many things, including provide universal pre-K, subsidized childcare, subsidized free community college, provide 12 weeks of paid family leave, help low-wage income workers, help elderly with medical care, and it will do so much more. And it is being stalled primarily by a political party and one person who says that he just can't go to West Virginia and say, hey guys, this is going to make our lives better, despite the fact that the majority of West Virginians want Build Back Better. They want it. Why? Because like the majority of Americans, the majority of West Virginians know that this is good for them. But the way of Caesar Augustus, the way of King Herod says no. Says we need to line our pockets. We need to increase the military budget so that we can create peace through strength and defeating our enemies. But did you know this? That the military budget is more than double the yearly cost of Build Back Better. Everybody is saying we can't afford Build Back Better. Not everybody is saying that. Everybody who is against Build Back Better is saying we can't afford it. No, they are not saying we can't afford the military budget, even though it is double, more than double, the yearly cost of Build Back Better. That, my friends, giving money to the military repeatedly over and over, increasing it, that is not the way of Christ. That is the way of Caesar. That is the way of King Herod. And the good news is that the people of West Virginia know it. The people of even the coal miners, did you hear this? The coal miners came out. The coal miners union came out and said that this senator needs to reconsider, his thoughts. Why? Because the coal miners know that this is good for them. That's the good news. That's the good news, that the Spirit of Christ, the Spirit of God's non-violent, universal love is spreading. Christ, who goes into the world almost the direct Christ goes into the world as the direct opposite of Caesar Augustus and King Herod. Why? Because he refuses to destroy or to kill his enemies. Instead, he loves them and calls us to love our enemies. Instead of harming people, of conquering with the sword, what does Jesus do? He goes out and he provides universal health care to anyone who is in need. That is the Spirit of Christ, the baby born into the world that we celebrate on this Christmas. It is a different way of life, the way of love and compassion. That is what we are being called into on this evening and on every day of our lives. Friends, I wish you a Merry Christmas. May we live into the way of Christ this day and forevermore. Amen.